Hello.
Hello and welcome to Young Guns. Today we're going to talk about the New Year's Six games that are non-playoff games. So grab that nice cold beverage out the fridge, crack that sucker open, sit back in that nice luxurious $1,000 recliner that you know is sitting in your living room, and enjoy the discussion.
All right, everybody. Well, first off, we got the very Orange Bowl between the Clemson Tigers and the Tennessee Volunteers. We got our boy Cade Klubnik, the sexy little freshman. And then we got the Tennessee captain, number 6 on the defense. If I can find him. Byron Young, captain. Because he's the only all SEC guy that's actually going to be playing for the Vols in this game. Opt outs suck.
Yep.
So with Tennessee's season, they had an unexpectedly great season, going 10-2 and 6-2 in the SEC. And they started off their SEC play knocking off Florida for the first time since 2016, 38-33. It wasn't pretty, but the Vols got it done and beat those Gators. And then the game that really got everyone's attention, the blowout in Death Valley. Death Valley became Sad Valley, and BK was not happy, which made me smile as the number 8 Vols blew out the number 25 Tigers in Baton Rouge 40-13. This put the whole college football world on notice that Hendon Hooker, Cedric Tillman, and Jalen Hyatt, those connections were really good and really effective. And then probably the game of the year, the Vols ended the streak and beat Nick Saban for the first time as they beat the Alabama Crimson Tide 52-49 and finally got to smoke those sweet victory cigars after the game. But it wasn't all happy for the Vols this year as they got trounced in Sanford Stadium in Athens by Georgia 27-13. No shame in that, though. I mean, Georgia, they're the defending champions and they're consensusly the best team in the country right now, as they've blown out every formidable team they have faced this year. But then in Columbia, in Williams-Brice Stadium, they got embarrassed. Although Hendon Hooker got hurt, it still does not make up for their pitiable performance in Columbia, as they got blown out 63-38 by a then unranked South Carolina team. Obviously, we've had some opt-outs for Tennessee, as Hendon Hooker won't be playing, but Joe Milton, the former Wolverine, will try to turn his college career around. As you can see Buckeye Mike's face by how bad he was in Ann Arbor. It was pathetic. And for the Clemson, although both teams only have 2 losses, Clemson's 2 losses, it's more painful for them because they had higher expectations going into the season. They have more talent than the Volunteers. But still, they won the ACC, so it's not a completely terrible year for Clemson. Their first scare of the year was in Winston-Salem, as Sam Hartman and Wake put on a show offensively, as did DJ Uyunglele. As it was a crazy game. Me and my friends, we were watching it in the dining hall at my college. We got to see the Tigers escape Winston-Salem with a 51-45 win in a crazy game. And then the Tigers, they put their statement down that they're the team to beat in the Atlantic Division in the ACC, as they won a gritty game against NC State, 30-20. And the atmosphere in the South Carolina Death Valley was just electric, as the teams were going crazy. as the fans were going crazy as the Clemson won back the Textile Bowl against their hated rival NC State. And then the first really bad result for bad game for DJ happened against Syracuse, as they did win the game 27-21, but DJ did not look good, and he got pulled for Cade Klubnik. And Cade led the team to victory in Death Valley over a then 14th ranked Orange team. And then they had their bye week, and they had a lot of time to prepare for my Fighting Irish. But clearly, the preparation did not pay off as the Irish trounced the Tigers, going up 28-0 at one point to cruise to a 35-14 victory, as I stormed the field in South Bend and got to celebrate with All-American Joe Alt. It was a great time for Will, a bad time for the Taters. And then the real heartbreaker came when the South Carolina Gamecocks came to town. As for some reason, Will Shipley, they forgot that he was usable in the second half, and they had DJ throw the ball, and it didn't go well, as they allowed the Gamecocks to come back and win the Palmetto Bowl over the Tigers 31-30, and a truly heartbreaking and obviously crazy result. But the Tigers did end up being ACC champions, as Cade Klubnik starred. After a couple bad series by DJ, they put in Cade, and they rolled over the Tar Heels 39-10 in their own state, winning the ACC championship. It seems like they win it every year, but this year they had to win it back because they lost the Atlantic Division to Wake last year, and Pitt won it. So congratulations to the Tigers for taking back the ACC. Not that impressive, but they got it done. And then, as the story goes, a little summary. A pretty disappointing season for Clemson, and a surprising Tennessee team will play in this extremely Orange Bowl. And the Tigers will bring out Cade Klubnik to take over at quarterback, and he's expected to put on a similar performance against UNC because Tennessee's defense isn't much better. But the Volunteers will start Joe Milton, who's just terrible for Michigan. But who knows? Josh Heupel may have fixed his problem of just chugging it deep and not really caring who's he's throwing it to. It can't be much worse for Milton. It'll be interesting to see how much he improved. Volunteers' three best offensive players opted out, unfortunately. Hendon Hooker, Cedric Tillman, and Jalen Hyatt. And unfortunately, Miles Murphy and Trenton Simpson are opting out for the Tigers. But this will still be an interesting game. We can see how good Joe Milton actually is. And we can see just how good, a glimpse at just how good Cade will be next year, as he certainly is a Heisman candidate.
Oh,
what's up? Cool. Oh, do you have a question?
We got everybody's picks for that game. We got to get the picks.
I'm going Clemson because they're much better at quarterback, and even though their offensive weapons aren't very good, no one opted out. So I think Clemson will win.
Okay.
I'll score prediction according to you, Will.
I'm going 31-20 Taters.
Okay. Sounds pretty cool. My turn.
Pick wise, yeah.
Yep. I'm going to say it's going to be a Clemson 35, Tennessee 20 victory.
Yeah, Edward points out Simpson didn't opt out. Willie needs ankle surgery.
My bad. That's what I heard. I was re-looking it up, and that's what it told me. I'm sorry.
And on Hendon Hooker, he's technically got a torn ACL. So, I mean,
he could have played. I bet he could have played. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's been.
Caleb Williams on a freaking torn hamstrings, so.
Yeah, so on this game, yeah, it's interesting because Tennessee, you got Joe Milton, and everybody's talking about how poor he was at Michigan, and his inaccuracy is very apparent. He's not good on accuracy at all. His throwing ability is frankly pretty poor. He has some mobility. I mean, a little bit, he can move around the pocket, but he's not Hendon Hooker on running the ball. So he just doesn't provide you that dynamic on offense. Clemson, K. Klubnik, he showed what he could do against North Carolina, even though North Carolina's defense is not very good. But I still think that he will play well in this game too. And I think that Clemson will beat Tennessee 28-24.
Yeah. If Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt were playing this game, I might have went the other way, but Clemson's defense is just going to be too much. And Clay Klubnik, he's found his way. He seems to be the guy that Dabo wants at quarterback. And I know Buckeye Mike will get to the quarterback thing down there when we get to him. But I think Clemson runs away with this game. I think Clemson wins 42-16. Tennessee just doesn't have it, and their defense is atrocious. So 42-16, Tigers.
Wow. Not that far off from me. And I don't say this just because Edward is in the chat, but yes, I'm hard on DJ. He just wasn't a great fit at Clemson. And it took until now for Dabo to realize that we don't need DJ playing for us because he doesn't fit in the offense correctly. He's good. Don't get me wrong. It's just if you don't fit in the offense, it makes you look bad. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, you want to call him DJ Doo-Doo, be my guest, but he's only doo-doo because of where he was. Anyway, I have a lot of respect for Heupel. Heupel's a great coach, but can we all agree that it's well, not that. I don't see how anyone could disrespect the god of a coach on the left side of that screen.
Right.
I love Dabo Swinney. Dabo Swinney is an amazing coach. The man's won 2 championships, national championships. He, unlike Brian Kelly, can win big games. With
And
that
won
being
the
said,
ACC 7 years.
yes. With that being said, I don't think because of all the opt-outs that Tennessee has a shot here. So, I'm going Clemson 49, Tennessee 10. Because Joe Milton is just absolute trash that I take to the dumpster every week.
Oh.
He just stinks. He stunk in the Michigan offense. He stinks in the Tennessee offense. So, I mean, go play in the FCS or Division III where you belong because you can't play with the big boys, man. Just bye. See ya.
He put up 56 points on Vanderbilt now. How dare you disrespect Vanderbilt?
Okay, so
Vanderbilt national
Alabama. It's Vanderbilt. I could put 56 on Vanderbilt by myself.
Hey, you guys were saying earlier in the season Vanderbilt could beat Texas A&M.
Still think they can. I still think they can.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole again.
Texas A&M is the best 5-7 team.
Well, I guess we're all set for the next one.
I predict the orange team will win.
You might be more specific, Troy.
I will not stand for Vandy slander.
All right. So now on the chopping block is Mr. Jackson to talk about the Sugar Bowl.
The Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, Louisiana, the party capital of the world. As you can very well see, the Alabama Crimson Tide, had a great start against Utah State, of course. But that Texas game, it was not easy to beat those Texas Longhorns. They brought out their A game against Bama, and it began to ask questions for everybody. Is Bama really going down? Is this just a one-off game? Who knows? But then, of course, they beat up on Louisiana Monroe, and then they beat up on Vanderbilt. They beat Arkansas, but then that Texas A&M game, they don't have Bryce Young because he got hurt against Arkansas in the middle of that game. So therefore, it was going to hurt them just a little bit against Texas A&M. Yes, they won, but it took it basically was just a stop. They basically had to stop A&M to win this game. It was not easy, but Bama was able to get it done. And then the big one, the Alabama-Tennessee game, which Alabama's 15-game winning streak over the Tennessee Volunteers snapped in Knoxville, Tennessee. And boy, the Volunteers were storming the field. They were tearing the field goal post apart. They were doing everything to it. But then the Alabama Crimson Tide rebound against the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And unfortunately, their national title hopes end with a 2-point conversion from LSU in overtime. But Alabama.
Now, let me ask you real fast, Jackson.
Right.
So do you think, looking at that game, the LSU game, do you think it was smart for them to go for 2 in that scenario? Or would you have kicked it and played for over?
Well, yeah. You go for the big game. You go for it in the big game. And besides,
my response always is that it's smart if you get it, and it's not if you don't.
And besides, the overtime rules, Austin, the overtime rules in college football these days suck. So, yeah, you go for 2.
I was just curious what your thoughts were on that, because that seemed to define Alabama's season. Because if LSU doesn't get that, more than likely Alabama's in the playoffs right now, and it's Bama and Georgia again.
Right.
And Ohio State's out of the discussion.
And it would basically, I think basically it'd be like a SEC Big Ten monopoly in the playoffs for this year with it'd be Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and basically everybody would not be too thrilled. But anyway, the Ole Miss game where Alabama rebounds in tight fashion, and then of course they beat Austin Peay, which, who really watched that game, let's be honest. And then the Iron Bowl, one of the best rivalries in all of college football. The Alabama Crimson Tide beat Auburn 49-27. And the total offensive yards per game, 475.5 yards per game, which is 13th in the nation. The passing yards in the offense, 278.3 yards per game. They are 23rd in the nation. Now, the rushing yards per game on offense are 197.3 yards per game, 29th in the nation. And the offensive point and the points per game is 40.8, which is tied 4th in the nation. The defensive yards per game, 311 yards allowed per game, 15th in the nation. The passing yards allowed per game, 186, which is 16th in the nation. The rushing yards allowed per game, 31st in the nation. And finally, the points allowed per game, tied 9th in the nation.
Yeah, I just have one quick question for you on this one.
Right.
And this is for the panel as well. Why do people get this notion that Alabama couldn't play defense this year? Because the numbers do back it up still. They still had a pretty solid year at defense.
I'm
just curious.
Because when you have the
not as good as like the 2011 or 2012 defense, for example. It's not as good compared to other defenses of the past.
That is fair. But the defense also wasn't that awful as people make it seem either. Because it seemed like after the Tennessee game, people were like, that Bama defense is awful. It's not, this ain't a Nick Saban defense.
So
They were up against.
Here's the thing. It wasn't a normal Nick Saban defense because they led the country, or they were top 5 in the country on penalties on defense. Because if it's a Nick Saban defense, they're usually at the bottom in defensive penalties, not at the top.
I guess the reason why people thought the defense was down is because it was compared to what it normally is. It still was a really solid defense, but for Alabama standards, the standards are set so high that anything less is a disappointment.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like Ohio State.
Right. Edward asked me a question. How many wide receivers have left Alabama through the portal before the game? Well, that's 3. JoJo Early is one that left for the portal. You know, he's the most notable one I can think of, and he's gone over to TCU. So, and Treshawn Holden, you know, he went to the portal, and Christian Leary went to the portal. So, yep, pretty much.
There you go.
You go onward to the Kansas State slide, and then we'll make our picks.
Yeah,
Troy V makes a good point. He said, I thought the biggest problem with Bama was they were 2 different teams. They were a great at home and then seemed to struggle on the road. Seen some of that last year as well. Not the typical Saban team. Well, Jackson, Jeffrey, since you both like Alabama, tell me what you think on that. Do you agree with that, or do you think maybe that's a little overkill, so to speak?
Well, I mean, Alabama, again, for a time was by far the most dominant team in college football, and there was no debate. And, you know, even if they didn't win the whole thing, they always were there. Well, Alabama's not the same team right now. They don't have the explosive wide receivers that they've had the past few years. The running game isn't what it used to be when they had Derrick Henry, Eddie Lacy back in the day. Their defense wasn't as good as it's been lately. Will Anderson regressed. He wasn't as solid as he was last season. Just the whole team, the penalties, just everything about Alabama is not as good as it was a few years ago. And that's all it is. I mean, they're still a fantastic team compared, you know, to 99% of teams, but they're not playing like the best football team in college football anymore. It's Georgia at this point. Alabama's just taken a slight step back. They're not as elite as they used to be, and part of that is they're not as good on the road. But, I mean, Alabama as a whole is just not as good right now as they used to be. It's just a small step, but you have to be elite to win it all or be the best team. If you take a small step back, it's noticeable, especially when you had the heights that Alabama reached for a decade.
Yeah, that is a fair point. I agree with you on that, Jeffrey, but you also got to think at look at the competition too. When you're competing with teams at LSU and Georgia and Tennessee's finally come around, and they play Texas this year, which they normally don't do. The competition has changed a little bit on Alabama too, so that probably does a lot of it to them. But that is still no excuse though, because you still played the competition that was lined up against you, whether it was LSU, Georgia, whoever you happened to play, and you just played bad. You played bad. There was no excuse. It's just the scheduling was finally not in Bama's favor, so to speak, this year. They finally got some of the tougher games that they normally wouldn't.
Well, that's just it. That's just it. Because if you look all over YouTube and you type in Alabama excuses, you will come across probably around 2,000 videos of Alabama since, I want to say about 2017, 2018, have started making up excuses when they lose. For example, the big one last year was, well, we lost to Georgia in the national championship because Jameson Williams got hurt. If he doesn't get hurt, we win the game outright because Georgia's not really that good. They're fake good. Well, if Georgia's really that fake good as you think, you should be able to win that game outright without Jameson Williams. So Bama has built themselves now on excuses. Oh, if we lose, there's no exception. It's excuse. It's not, we screwed up here. We need to fix this and move on. It's excuse.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
again, when you've been the best team in college football for a decade, and now that you're not, of course the fan base is going to make excuses. I mean, should they? No, but that's what they're going to do. I mean, that's of course.
Oh well.
Yeah.
I guess we're set. I
And-
guess it's
You can go
Yeah,
ahead, Jackson.
and
yeah. I was gonna go ahead and review Kansas State. They start off shutting out South Dakota, but what else new? That's what you're supposed to do. Then they go up against old Big 8, Big 12 foe Missouri and smack them down 40-20. And then on ESPN Plus, maybe this game should have been on Disney Plus, who knows? But this was the most rated non-con game in all of college football. Little did we know. The Kansas State Wildcats and the Tulane Green Wave. Tulane pulls off an upset 17-10 over Kansas State at Manhattan. But then on Fox 6:30, the Kansas State Wildcats go to Oklahoma and pull off that upset and start the downfall of Brent Venables' first year with a 41-34 victory. And then Kansas State beats Texas Tech 37-28. Then it's a low-scoring game against Iowa State. And then it comes down to a 10-9 victory. Then we have the TCU matchup. And boy, oh boy, did TCU give them the what for. They got them big. There was a thing where TCU was always hurting quarterbacks this year, where it's they just happened to have a starting quarterback. They happened to get a starting quarterback hurt, and then next week, boom. But
yeah, this was a game, Jackson, not to cut you off too fast, but this was a game that had an asterisk on it. They were if TCU plays Kansas State again, are we going to see a different outcome? Which we did, which you'll get to. But I just find that funny, though, that when that happens,
well, yeah,
that's what they go to.
Yeah, because Adrian Martinez, he was just meh. But then they turned it around with Will Howard, as they shellacked the Oklahoma State Cowboys with a 48-0 victory. That doesn't look like a Big 12 title contender. Oklahoma State, you're supposed to be a contender. Oh, wait. Contenders don't get shut out 48-0. Maybe Kansas State.
Jackson, we could do a whole.
Stay tuned.
Jackson, we could do a whole show on State.
Huh?
Jackson, we could do a whole show on Oklahoma State's disappointments.
Oh, they're awful. But that's another time for another day. But is Kansas State a contender? Ooh, let's find out. Well, unfortunately, they lose a tight one in tight fashion against the Texas Longhorns at a 34-27 loss. But then they rebound against Baylor with a 31-3 victory. But then they go to Morgantown and just shellac the Mountaineers of West Virginia 48-31. And then in the Sunflower State Showdown, they go up against the Kansas Jayhawks, who had a similar wonderful season, but unfortunately weren't contenders. But hey, they had College Game Day come to Lawrence this year. So that's a win. But Kansas State beat up the Kansas Jayhawks 47-27. And then the rematch of the Big 12 title game between the Kansas State Wildcats and the TCU Horned Frogs. And what does Kansas State do? They pull it off. Deuce Vaughn and Will Howard pull off the massive upset at the Jerry Dome in overtime, 31-28. And now the stats for Kansas State throughout the 2022 season. They were 42nd in yards per game on offense. The total, 420.2 yards per game. The passing yards per game were 210.5 yards per game on offense, which were 93rd in the nation. Yeesh. But the rushing yards, oh man, Deuce Vaughn, man, that he has been a wonder for this Kansas State team. They were 209.6 yards per game, and they were 16th in the running game. And my God, that's wonderful. And the points per game on offense, they were 31st in the nation, and they had 33.2 points per game. Oh man, I put a yards per game. My bad. That was not smart. But yeah, the defensive yards per game were 365.8 yards per game, and they were 52nd. They were 55th in the nation in yards allowed per game. I mean, the defense. And the passing yards per game were 216.8 yards per game allowed in the passing yards, which made them 53rd in the nation. The rushing yards allowed per game were 148.9 yards per game allowed, which equaled to 64th in the nation. And the points allowed per game were 20.1 points per game allowed, which made it tied 19th in the nation. I tell you what, I'm very impressed with Chris Kleiman and the job he's done. Oh, and by the way, no opt-outs from Kansas State. They're not opting out of this opportunity. I can guarantee you that. They are not opting out against the Alabama Crimson Tide. No way on God's green earth are they going to miss this opportunity. No way, no sir, they are not going to miss it. But
now my question is, coming into this season, was Kansas State even considered a Big 12 contender?
They were considered a dark horse. They weren't really considered for that, I'm sure. There were a few people that considered them a Big 12 title winner. I think people looked more towards Oklahoma State and Oklahoma more than they really did Kansas State, but you saw how that turned out for the Oklahoma State teams this year. And I don't think Baylor was expected to go sits and sits for sure. But one thing's for sure, Kansas State is going to bring their A game, folks. They are going to bring their A game. And I don't think Will's here with us. So Will said it's going to be Alabama Crimson Tide victory, 34-21. Mm-hmm. I have it being an Alabama victory, but I think it's going to be a 31-28 victory. This game is not easy, folks. And I'm just going to tell you right now, if it was a home game, I would pick Alabama to beat them more than 3. But because it's neutral site, I think it's going to be a closer than the experts have it. So Alabama 31, Kansas State 28.
The interesting storyline for this game is Bryce Young and Will Anderson are playing. That makes a whole lot of difference.
So now, if you're watching this game, your boy Will Levis isn't playing in the Music City Bowl. So sit back, relax, and watch the Sugar Bowl. And watch
Jeffrey.
Now, on this game, before I get to it, another point about the man, I lost my train of thought. I had it in my head, but on this game right here, I think that it's going to be a close game. Excuses. Alabama, people talk about the excuses with Alabama, how they're the top team, but now they're making excuses for every time they lose. Well, part of the problem with that is because of the fact ESPN, a lot of networks, CBS, Fox, a lot of these major networks, And I mean, it's nothing against them. I mean, they're just doing their job, but they're the ones that do spin the narrative with the excuses. They say, hey, Alabama would have won the national title if Jameson Williams was healthy. A lot of, people on YouTube do that. So people spin the narrative, and then more people will say it because they hear it from somewhere else, that they think is knowledgeable. That's part of the thing. And when you have a team that loses a lot, then they don't get as much credit when they have a lot of injuries. So like a 5-7 team that maybe should have gone 8-4, no one's going to say, oh, they had a lot of injuries. Maybe a diehard fan would, but no one's going to care. But when it's a team like Alabama, yes, they will. Every injury is magnified. That's just the way it is. When you're a big team, Georgia, the networks will do the same thing with Georgia now. If they have injuries, they'll make excuses too. That's just the way it is. But on this game, I think it's going to be a close game. If Bryce Young and Will Anderson were not playing, it would, very heavily incline me to want to pick Kansas State because, again, as Jackson pointed out, no opt-outs. But I will say that I think Bryce Young, it might be enough just to get him over the top.
Mhm.
And if they lose, then the excuses from the networks will be that Alabama had all the opt-outs, of course, and Kansas State didn't get a legitimate win, even with Bryce Young. But still, if Kansas State wins, kudos to them. It is their national title, as someone said in the comment section. But I will say that Alabama will beat Kansas State 31-28.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the more
You said
intriguing games.
Jeffrey, you said it's going to be Bama 31-28?
31-28.
That's my final score, too. Sorry, Austin.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the more intriguing games of New Year's Six that I'm really excited for, because Kansas State, they're this team that they're kind of the underdog. Like, everyone's like, oh, Kansas State, they've had a really good season, but now it's time for you to face reality, kids. You're going up against big bad Bama. And Alabama, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, they will be playing, so that does make a big difference. But
Jeffrey and I just have the same taste, man. So there you go.
But
That happens a lot.
Since there is no opt-outs on either side, I was originally going to take Kansas State.
Before I knew Jackson's, by the way.
I was originally going to take Kansas State because I thought, Bama's going to have these opt-outs and stuff. But after Bryce Young and Will Anderson said they're coming back to play this one last game and having that cruddy taste in their mouth, that how dare they leave us out of this college football playoffs? We're Alabama. How dare they? So how dare they pick crappy Ohio State? So with all that, I think Nick Saban, Alabama, they're mad. They're ticked off. They're going to take it out on Kansas State. They had a great year. They won the Big 12. But Alabama is going to win this game 38-14. They just roll them over. Dominate. 38-14 Bama.
Okay. Now, I'm about to school all of you, because not so fast, my friends. We've seen this before, twice, with Bama in this game. We've seen it before. First of all. Second of all, Bama didn't deserve to even go to the playoff. It's not the Alabama Invitational. I don't care how stuck up you are as a Bama fan, and not you two up top. In general, it's not the Bama Invitational. It's called the College Football Playoff for a reason. Second of all, like I said, we've seen this twice before. Utah, nobody gave Utah a chance in the 2009 Sugar Bowl. They beat Bama by 2 touchdowns, 31-17. 2014 Sugar Bowl, no one gave Trevor Knight and Bob Stoops-led Oklahoma a shot against Bama in the 14 Sugar Bowl. Oklahoma won 45-31. So we've seen this before. Yes, Serge, I know it kind of is the Alabama Invitational because they've only missed it twice. But my point is, it's not legally.
It's not
So,
legally
that
binding.
being said, what?
It's not legally binding.
That being said, K-State has the heart. And the momentum coming into this game. Yeah, Alabama might come in with fire lit under their behinds because Nick Saban was doing the warm-ups during practice recently with the team. So it's all, oh, Nick Saban's so mad he wants to go out and play with the team himself. Okay, maybe he's just trying to stay in shape. That's all it is. My point is, K-State is coming in with the better stuff here because who is near the top in penalties in the NCAA? It's not the team on screen. It's the team that was on screen before them. Alabama is near the top in penalties per game. Will Anderson automatically lines up offsides every time. So that being said, I'm going to take Kansas State winning this game. Whatever, Edward. I'm going to take Kansas State to win this game. Give me, because it's usually an average of 2 touchdowns that they lose by in the Sugar Bowl when they lose. If it's not the playoff, give me Kansas State to win 31-21. You guys got to remember your history here.
It's Alabama.
Okay,
And
but
Nick
Alabama
Saban.
lost twice under Nick Saban in the Sugar Bowl when it's not the CFP.
With bad quarterbacks.
So you got Kansas State.
Yep.
Mike, what's your final score?
31-21.
Wow.
Alabama had bad quarterbacks back then, though. I mean, just that's part of the thing.
Buckeye Mike,
Really?
you got the chat going tonight, buddy.
There you go, my man.
A little spicy tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir. All right. I
But
believe the floor is yours, Jeffrey.
All right.
Jeffrey.
So our
I
next game is the Cotton Bowl on ESPN between the USC Trojans and the Tulane Green Wave. And this game right here, I know Tim is not in the chat right now, but if someone picks Tulane, okay, it's just a prediction, man. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. Who knows what's going to happen, but you've got Caleb Williams.
Somebody's going to pick Tulane. We're not
You've
telling
got
you.
Any
Caleb
updates?
Williams on the left, and, you know, is he going to play? A lot of people saying he will, some saying he won't. It's kind of up in the air. But he had a fantastic season. And Tulane, they bounced back from a 2-10 season to a fantastic 11-2 season this year with their quarterback, Michael Pratt. So I think this is going to be a close game, and the statistics really back it up. If you look at Tulane, they had a great season. I mean, they 11-2, 7-1 in the American, and they started their season with a win over UMass, 42-10. They beat Alcorn State 52-0. That's to be expected. And then they won at Kansas State 17-10 on ESPN Plus, as Jackson pointed out. And again, you know, you could argue that game should have been on a bigger network, but at the time, I don't think people were really expecting Tulane to do what they did. And Kansas State was the middle of the pack Big 12 team, so it makes sense at the time. But in hindsight, that game should have been on ESPN or something like that. But that was a fantastic momentum-changing win for Tulane. But then they had a slip-up game, a letdown game after that, and they lost to Southern Miss 27-24, a team they were clearly better than. But since you had won at Kansas State, again, always a chance for a letdown. And they slipped up there. Then they won at Houston in overtime, 27-24. That was a good win, even though Houston was not as good as they were last year, but it was still a good win. Then they beat East Carolina 24-9. That was a good win, too. Then they won at South Florida 45-31. They beat Memphis 38-28. They won at Tulsa 27-13, so beating up on the more of the bottom teams in the American. Then they lost at UCF 38-31. Which almost might have been a blessing in disguise to lose to them the first time because you beat them the second time around in the more important game. Then you beat SMU 59-24 in a game that SMU's defense did not show up, and SMU's defense didn't show up in that Houston game as well. Then they won at Cincinnati 27-24, the first team to beat Cincinnati on their own turf in 3 years. That was a fantastic win in the final game of the regular season. And then they beat UCF in the rematch in the American Conference title game 45-28. And then their offensive stats, in defensive stats in 2022. Their offense put up 433.9 yards per game. Their defense only allowed 342.4. It's always good when your offense is putting up almost 100 more yards than your defense is allowing. That's fantastic. On passing offense, they had 236.9 yards. Pass defense, 188.5. And the run offense was 197.1. The run defense was 153.8. You guys have any thoughts on Tulane's season real quick?
Oh, it was
Yeah, I got a question. But go ahead, Jackson.
Man, it was fantastic. I mean, they literally have a 2-win season because, like, bad weather kind of hurt their season a little bit. And, they were just kind of like, I just want to get through this year. Can't blame them there. So in 2022, they turn it all around. Little did any of us know that win against Kansas State was going to catapult their season into awesomeness. They go from a 2-win season last year to unexpectedly winning the American Athletic Conference and going 11-2 and possibly getting their 12th win. Oh, and by the way, in the preseason, they weren't even expected to make a bowl game. Hey, you know what they were doing? They were expected to be 7th in the conference.
Yeah. My question here for everybody is, what do you think the big key to this turnaround was for them? Because Tulane, as Jackson pointed out, they were not a team that everyone was like, Tulane, they're going to break some hearts this year. They're going to end Cincinnati's home winning streak. They're going to win the American. They're going to upset the soon to be Big 12 champions down the road. What do you think led to all this? Was it just the fact that they finally, they put the right group together and it just all came together like soup? And it's like when you put all those good vegetables and beef in there and it all mixes together and makes a good soup. And that's what happened with Tulane. What do you guys think?
I just think that everything that went wrong for them last year went wrong, and everything that could go right this year went right. Because, I mean, it was essentially the same team. Most of the players that they had last year returned, but last year they had a bunch of injuries. The hurricane happened. They were displaced, having to play all over the place on, road games that should have been home games. Michael Pratt was injured all season, but he played through it. A lot of their team got hurt, and this year, none of that happened. They didn't have a hurricane. I mean, they definitely overexceeded expectations. I mean, they completely overexceeded, but it seemed just like everything went right. Because, I mean, you look at the schedule, and I mean, a lot of results could have gone differently. You could have lost to Cincinnati. You could have lost to Houston. You could have lost to Kansas State. They could have a lot more losses than they do, but just everything went right, and they had a fantastic season.
They got it to break their way.
Yeah,
and again, and I've mentioned this before, Chris, in prior streams, they were competitive against Oklahoma last year in the season. They hardly won any games. The reason why is because that's before everything went wrong. Michael Pratt wasn't hurt. The hurricane hadn't happened yet. So basically, that game is what Tulane was this year. That game. It showed you how good Tulane was last season. And this year, that team that you saw against Oklahoma showed up all season. They didn't have the problems that derailed their season last year.
Right.
I notice real fast on the stats, the run defense seems to be pretty good for Tulane. Is that something that if USC wants to try to run the ball, if Caleb Williams does trot out there, do they want to try to stray away from the run? Because it seems Tulane's run defense isn't all that bad.
Well, my question in defense of that is, out of 100%, how healthy do you think Caleb Williams is, guys? There's no way he's 100%.
If we're having to talk about his health, this close to the game, he's not very. So,
yeah, hamstring injuries, they're not nothing to play with. Because if you re-injure it, you could be out for 6 to 8 weeks. Who knows how long?
I'm going to say no one cares on here, obviously, right now because we're talking college football, but Devin Booker for the Phoenix Suns hurt his groin. He came back too early, and now he's out for 4 weeks with the same thing, but it got worse. So, yeah, it's like when Caleb Williams instance. If he's not careful, he could play in this game and re-injure it, make it worse, and be out for a long time in the offseason. So I agree.
Now my question is, when they originally diagnosed it, was it just a pulled, or did it come completely off the bone?
It was just a pull. I think when I mentioned that earlier, I think I said that wrong. I think I classified it as a tear, but I'm trying to go back up in the comments to see. Someone, I think, said it was just a pull. I think it was Edward.
Mm-hmm. I guess
Okay,
moving
so
on
that-
to USC.
Yeah,
if
it
you
was
guys are
strained.
ready.
It was strained.
So a strain, he's had what, almost 3 weeks? It should be about 85%. You never completely heal from it, but I imagine he's doing a lot of yoga and stuff trying to help relieve the tension in it. But we're not doctors though, so
I mean, at least
There's
we
that.
won't have. At least we won't have to see bleep Tulane on his fingernails.
but anyway, go ahead, Jeffrey. Talk about the great Trojans.
All right, so USC almost was the class of the Pac-12 this year, but they still had a great season. Maybe over-exceeded some expectations by certain people, but for others, maybe about right. But USC had a great season at 11-2, 8-1 in the Pac-12, and they started their season beating Food 66-14. And then they won at the Tree 41-28 in a game that, in hindsight, actually wasn't really an impressive performance considering how bad Stanford really was. They beat Fresno State 45-17. That was a really good win on paper, but Jake Haener didn't get hurt. And obviously, that game probably would have been closer if he didn't get hurt in that game, but still USC probably would have won. Then they won at Oregon State 17-14. And even though Oregon State ended up having a great season, USC really struggled to pull this one out. Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, Jeffrey, real quick. That was a really good game that no one got to see because it was on the Pac-12 network. Shame on you, Pac-12. You should have at least put it on ESPN2 because that was a great game. Oregon State ended up being better than what they actually were predicted. And USC got an early test for Vallis.
Yeah, Austin, to your point, that was a wonderful game. Yeah, I mean, it was wow. That was big.
But continue on, Jeffrey.
That's a good one.
I just thought that
two lanes, too many letters for one. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, to your point, yes, that game should have been on ESPN. The Pac-12 does get terrible scheduling because just the way it is, they're late and there's not enough time slots. And no one was really expecting anything out of Oregon State, even though expecting to be a bowl team, but maybe not as good as they were. But again, that was not, a great performance from USC. Yes, it was still early in the season. They did pull out the win, but you would have liked to have won that game by more or put up more points in that game. But still, their defense held up and they pulled it out. Then they beat Arizona State 42-25. Nothing to write home about. Good win there. Then they beat Washington State 30-14. Washington State had a pretty solid season overall. Kind of faltered a bit at the end, but USC did good in that game. Then they lost at Utah 43-42. Maybe controversial according to USC fans, but unfortunately they just could not get that win. It was a great game. They fell short on a 2-point conversion by Utah. Then they won at Arizona 45-37. And this game right here was one where you would expect USC to win by more. Arizona under Jedd Fisch is an improved football team, but only winning by 8 on the road on a below 500 team was not very impressive. Then they beat California 41-35 at home, and California was awful. So those two performances were kind of alarming for USC. They did not play well on defense. Yeah, they put up a lot of points, but they should have beaten both these teams by more. Then they beat Colorado 55-17. Better result, but Colorado was that bad. Then they won at UCLA. Go ahead, Austin.
I just want to say something real fast. So do you think, Jeffrey, that the Arizona-California games were a result of hangover from Utah? Because teams do have tended, we always talk about the winning of the hangover. Like, they won the big game, and then the next week they come out and put a complete dud. Because LSU did it against Arkansas. But do you think USC did it on the losing end? Like, dang it, if we would have stopped the 2-point conversion, we would be this right about now. And it translated to Arizona-Cal. Do you think that was the reason why, or just those two teams were better than originally thought?
Well, I mean, yes, you can make that point. I mean, there's always it's the whole excuse thing with Alabama. You make excuses when they lose. Well, I mean, kind of here you can make that excuse. Maybe it's not exactly an excuse. Maybe it's a legitimate point. But for some reason, USC's defense at the end of the season was awful. After that, after that Washington State game and the Utah game, yes, Utah was a great team, but their defense was terrible. I mean, the rest of the season, they didn't even look like they were really giving it 100% on defense. So maybe that was a result of the Utah game having a hangover, but that was the problem. I mean, again, as I said, they put up the points. They scored 40 plus points in both those games, but their defense allowed 37 and 35, especially to California, whose offense was terrible all season long. They lost to Colorado, but yet you gave up 35. That's not how you're supposed to do it if you're going to be a playoff team. That's why a lot of people were concerned getting to the game we're about to get to in the Pac-12 championship game was that can their defense hold up? And it did not. Because really, everyone wants to talk about Tennessee, South Carolina, and how Tennessee, they lost Hendon Hooker. Well, they would have lost the game anyway, even with Hendon Hooker, because their defense was that bad. You can make the argument that if Caleb Williams is not, is 100% and he's not injured in that game and he's healthy, USC could still lose to Utah because their defense was playing that poorly in the game. So again, we'll never know, but that's just my point on that. Like the defense folded. I don't know if it was a result of that Utah game. You could be right. Maybe it was hangover, but after that game, their defense was awful the rest of the way. But then they beat Colorado. Yeah. They should have beaten them as much as they did, and they did. Then they won at UCLA 48-45, and this was the game that a lot of people thought after this, USC's making the playoff. Even me, I thought they had a shot, and they did after that game because they played really well. But again, their defense was awful. And yes, DTR is a great quarterback when he's on, but USC's defense was paper thin against UCLA. They just put up enough points to win. And then they beat Notre Dame in the final game of the regular season. If Will was here, he'd be not so happy about that result. But again, they beat Notre Dame 38-27. It was a pretty good performance on offense. Their defense was a bit better in this game, but still not as good as it was earlier in the season. And then in the Pac-12 championship game, they lost to Utah 47-24, lost them both times this season. This one was the worst performance. Yes, Caleb Williams got hurt, but their defense was atrocious. They just could not get anything going. If USC's defense had to play like they did it earlier in the season, then USC would be in the college football playoff right now. And then if you look at their stats, the numbers kind of back it up. On offense, they put up 499.8 yards per game. And that's really solid. I mean, almost 500 yards of offense. And then on defense, you gave up 415.1. You never want to give up more than 400 yards of offense to the other team. Yes, there's a lot of good offenses in the Pac-12, but USC, you want that number to be under 400. It's hard to be a playoff team if your defense is giving up more than 400 yards per game. Even Alabama, as we pointed out earlier, only allowed 311 yards per game on defense. USC gave up over 100 more yards per game. That's just not going to get it done. 100 more yards per game than Alabama did. And then on their passing offense, fantastic with Caleb Williams, 325.7, passing defense, 266.5. Again, the offense was really good. Too many passing yards given up on defense. And then on the run offense, 174.2, and the run defense was 148.6. And not as bad on the run defense. The run offense was pretty solid all season. So what do you guys think about their season overall and the numbers and the schedule?
Well, I figured USC was, just going to get an 10-11 win season. I mean, was anybody really that surprised that Lincoln Riley was going to turn it around in 2022 in his first year? Really? Nobody was surprised. I mean, if you look at the Phil Steele magazine in the preseason, guess who is number one on his surprise teams list? USC. And, I mean, was anybody surprised? No. Because he took a bunch of those Oklahoma guys with him. So, of course it was going to work out for USC. They were going to be winning this year. I'm not.
I agree with this, but I'm not surprised they did as good as they did.
Mm.
But, yeah, they were pretty good this year, but, yeah.
Well, I mean, to Tim's point, when you said that he took the whole Oklahoma team, to be fair, he only took 3 players, but he took the 3 best players. It's the fact that in the transfer portal, he took so many players like Jordan Addison, all these type of players, Travis Dye. You know, he got some good defensive players, even though they didn't perform that well. I mean, that's why it wasn't as much of a surprise. I mean, if you had USC's roster from last year and you had a decent recruiting class, then if he went 11-2, it'd be insane. But he brought in so many top transfers that were so talented that it just made it not as surprising.
Yeah.
I will say, we won't go too far down this rabbit hole. I had USC going 9-3 this year, and I said
too.
that on our surprising and disappointing teams list. Which, if you haven't seen that yet, go check it out. That's a great live stream we did not too long ago. Go check it out. You won't be disappointed. But back to this anyway. I had them going 9-3, 11-2 though. That's still a little surprising considering that UCLA took a big jump. Oregon State took a really big jump. Utah, and if they would have played Washington and Oregon, who knows how many they come out with. They played Notre Dame, which turned out not to be a good as win as it is, because they lost to the Tree and the Thundering Herd of Marshall. But overall in the season, USC, their fans are really happy that they finally are relevant once again, and they're in the Cotton Bowl, and Caleb Williams wins the Heisman, which he wasn't a Heisman favorite at the beginning of the year. But these last stretch of games after that Utah performance, kind of, the field kind of opened up for him, and he kind of walked right into it because there wasn't much there competition-wise, because once Bryce Young missed that game, it kind of opened the field. Okay, who's going to take it? And Caleb Williams was the guy to take it. And then in their schedule, they were able to make it through unscathed except the 2 Utah losses, which you shouldn't be disappointed. You lost to Utah, who became back-to-back Pac-12 champions. We'll get to that soon enough. But overall, this is a very good season in Lincoln Riley's first year. Let's just see if he can keep it going. But, yeah, their
Connor
offense –
Johnson says ranked the top half of the pack.
do we have all day for that? Because that could take a while, because you could go so many ways. Because you could put Utah 1. Then you can go. We'll do that another day, Connor.
It's not going to take that
Day,
long.
our man.
I mean, it's not that hard. It's not going to take that long.
Yeah, but still.
But, yeah, it's just a great season overall.
I'll go with Utah, USC, Washington, Oregon State, Oregon, UCLA.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
I would go Utah, Oregon State, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC.
I'll go
Okay.
Utah, Washington, USC, Oregon State, Oregon, UCLA.
Okay. Utah, USC, Washington, Oregon, UCLA. Then Oregon State.
That Civil War game did not impress you enough, though, man? Come on.
Oregon, they're still the better team in my book. I think Oregon State just had to think all their way.
I don't care. Oregon State got the dub, man. They got the dub over Oregon. That's
So
why.
who are we picking in this game here? Who are we picking, guys? You can go Jackson.
Speaking of which, Will, who's not with us here, who left earlier, he says it's going to be a 35-17 victory for USC. But I say not so fast to Will, my friend. I'm going to go Tulane 28, USC 24. Now, why am I going with Tulane? Good question.
Because you love Tulane.
Partly. But that USC defense, man, 82nd in scoring defense, 82nd in points per game allowed, 114th, 114th in passing yards allowed per game, 60 in rushing yards allowed per game, 102nd in total yards allowed per game. Does that really sound like a team that's gonna win the Cotton Bowl? And all these opt-outs, all these injuries that USC's been getting, that is gonna hurt them. And plus, I have not heard of anybody from Tulane opting out of this game. So
The big key to this, I know it's not my turn. I just will say the big key to this is whether Caleb Williams is playing or not, because he could sometimes be the whole offense, and that's all that matters.
yeah, he just better not treat Tulane like he did Utah, because if he does, Tulane's gonna make him regret it. Which is why I go with Tulane 28-24. Tulane's gonna bring their A game against the Trojans.
This is the exact reason why it's so tough to pick these games now, because you don't know who's playing, who's healthy, transfer portal, opt-outs, everything. It makes it so tough because if you're looking at this on paper, if you have a full USC team, all their players playing, and a complete Tulane team, it's easy who to pick. It's USC. But with their team situation, especially with Caleb Williams, is he healthy? Is he going to play? All that. It makes it a lot harder to pick them. But I don't really know what to say either way, because it could go either way. USC is not as strong of a team right now with everything they got going on. But I'm still going to go USC to beat Tulane 31-28, because it's going to be really tough for Tulane to beat them even without all the players USC is missing and stuff. But I'm going to still go with USC.
Yeah, I think if Caleb Williams plays, there's no doubt who wins this game. But since we don't know the status, it like you said, Jeffrey, it makes it hard because Tulane, they've been on this Cinderella carpet ride, so to speak. They've kind of had things go their way, like TCU has. We'll get to that tomorrow. A little sneak peek, but
Yep.
in this game, I think it's going to come down to if Caleb Williams is not there. I'm just going to assume that at this point, can USC run the ball on them, and can they set up the backup quarterback up good and not turn the ball? And if they can do that, they'll beat Tulane. And I think for that reason, I think Tulane will give them a good fight, but I don't think Tulane has enough, even with the opt-outs. I'm going USC 34, Tulane 24. I'm going Trojans. Fight on.
Your turn.
So you do know that Caleb Williams is hurt, right? Whether he plays or not, he's still hurt. He won't be 100%.
Yes, but an 80% Caleb Williams is better than half the quarterbacks nowadays. So take that with what you want.
I don't know, man. That being said, I have something to say to you, Jeffrey, and Will. Not so fast, my friend. We're going big time with this one. I'm thinking this leans more towards the 2019 Cotton Bowl with the team we're about to get to next in Penn State and a team that we talked about earlier in one of our previous videos, Memphis. Except I think Tulane can get the job done this time. So I'm going to go Tulane 56, USC 47. It doesn't matter if Caleb plays or not. The defense sucks. I have no problem saying that loud and clear. I'll say it again. The defense sucks on USC. They don't have any depth outside of their safety, but you guys don't know how to tackle. You need to do that. Football.
You know that Austin picked USC too, so it's not so fast, my friend Will, Jeffrey, and Austin. Because I mean, he picked
Yeah, that's what I
USC.
said.
Now you only said me and Will.
Oh, I thought I said
Buckeye
all
Mike,
three.
Buckeye Mike, you're making some USC enemies tonight, my friend.
Hey, I'm just telling it like it is. You gotta, and that's the thing. We'll get to it tomorrow, but Ohio State defense is just a little bit better than USC's.
And
But
it's probably
yeah.
a little bit more better, and that's not a phrase, but just more better than USC's. Okay, it's a lot better. Okay, all defenses are a lot better, more and better and best. Okay, USC's defense is last. It's that bad.
Okay. So to come to their defense, USC's defense has gotten turnovers though when it has mattered. There is that in their favor. So you can't say it's all bad.
Well, again,
90% of it.
you don't know how to tackle. You literally,
Edward
okay.
says USC does like to hook people into the end zone. That is true. Yes.
Yes.
They let
To
him go
my
on
point.
3rd and 19. They could have had a tackle when he pushed them and let him go for a score.
Thanks for stealing my thunder.
Sorry.
Yeah, that
So
was
it's-
bad.
You had all the thunder in that interview earlier, man. All right, you know.
So it looks
here's-
like our picks
Here's the
top.
thing. Here's the thing. USC fans, shut up that Utah first go round was a fluke. When you get beat the first time and get slaughtered in your backyard the second time, it's no fluke. You just don't know how to beat that team. You suck against that team. And you know what? If Ohio State wins, no prediction one way or the other, but if Ohio State wins and Michigan wins the national title over Ohio State, the same thing goes for me and the Ohio State fans. You got beat twice. There was no fluke.
Yeah, it's not a
Austin-
fluke for anyway. I mean, literally the
Austin-
Michigan win over Ohio State was not a fluke. The Utah win over USC is not a fluke. The only like Missouri beating Georgia is a fluke because Georgia would have played terrible, and you know in that game Missouri squeaked out a win, but that would have been a fluke. Utah beating USC was not a fluke. Everybody knew Utah was still a good team, and
Right.
Michigan beating Ohio State is not a fluke. There's a difference between being a fluke like that than again Georgia losing Missouri. That's a fluke.
Austin,
So how do you really feel, Buckeye Mike? Let them know. Have your moment.
How do I really feel? I really feel that USC fans need to shut up and stop praising what happened this year. When you can't tackle, you wrap your arms around. Halftime, you just push the guy and give up a touchdown on 3rd and 19 from the 40-yard line. Your defense stinks. Yeah, Ohio State's defense is not very good either. Your defense is worse than Ohio State. You stink. And yes, you get lucky and create turnovers when you need it, to Jeffrey's point. But I just can't stand the overhype of USC. I can't stand it for Ohio State either. But I can't stand it for USC.
It's
right.
because they're a
With that
brand.
being
That's the only
said-
reason, man. When you're a brand, you get overhyped.
Austin, are you ready to give on the granddaddy of them all in Pasadena, California?
Hold on. Before we go there, Jackson, does anyone have any more to say about either of these two teams besides USC? Any objections?
Tulane, I think Tulane has a really good shot to win this game with USC not being at 100% of a team. I mean, it'd be really cool if they can get a win and be a big upset. But again, if USC just does not do what Buckeye Mike is explaining down there all game long, they should pull out a win.
You got anything else to say, Buckeye Mike, or did you get it all out?
Pretty much. I just hate USC.
That's pretty apparent.
Obviously.
Jackson, you got anything? Do you got anything else to say before we go on to my granddaddy of them all?
I said all I need to say. That's why I'm ready for you to talk about the granddaddy of them all between the Utah Utes and the Penn State.
The Rose Bowl, the old logo.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is time for the main event of the evening. And it's featuring the Utah Utes and the Penn State Nittany Lions in Pasadena, California. The Rose Bowl, the greatest tradition in Pac-12 history, is upon us. My good man, on to the Utah slide. So, the Utah Utes, 10-3 overall, 7-2 in the Pac-12. They started off the year with a loss to the Florida Gators. Gators, we've talked about this game at nauseum. Cam Rising throwing that pick at the end. If he doesn't throw it and there's 5 more minutes, Utah probably wins that game and they're right in the college football conversation. That we've talked about that plenty of time. Then next week they come back home. They beat Southern Utah 73-7. They beat San Diego State 35-7. They go at Arizona State 34-14. I know the desert sometimes catches teams off guard, but Utah's on a roll here. They come back home. They dominate Oregon State 42-16. And then they have another slip up to Chris's favorite team in the chat, the UCLA Bruins, 42-32. And that's when UCLA got their recognition. But then they go on a bye week, a much-needed bye week. No, excuse me. My bad. Then they come home to play USC in a thrilling of a game where Cam Rising wins it at the end on a 2-point conversion. And then they go on their bye week. And then they go at Washington State. Cam Rising doesn't play. Dalton Kincaid doesn't play. They eke it out 21-17. Another game where Washington State, had it at the end, but Utah made the plays with their backups and were able to win that game. Then then Arizona. They beat Arizona at home 45-20. No shock there. Utah took care of business. And then the Stanford Tree, 42-7, took care of business. And then at Oregon, a loss 20-17, low-scoring defense. And Oregon was able to win the game at the end, field goal. And then they dominate. And then it all becomes of, okay, Utah thinks their season's lost. It's gone. But then there's still hope they can make the Pac-12 title game if they get everything to fall their way. With a Washington win in the Apple Cup, and Oregon loss to Oregon State, and a Utah win in Colorado, which they did handily, and they got everything to fall their way. And then they got the rematch that happened in Salt Lake, and the hype going into this game. Is Utah as good as people think they are? Is USC gonna show them that the first time was a fluke? But when we come to find out, it wasn't a fluke. Utah basically said, "This is our conference, USC. Get in the back of the line. You toed the line behind us here." Okay? And there you see the beautiful picture of Cam Rising holding that trophy, looking out into his beautiful fans of Utah, going back to back. And now over here, the 2022 Utah Utes stats. Total offense, 472.7. Total offense. Total defense, 325.3. Pass offense, 252.5. Pass defense, 218.3. Run offense, 220.2. Run defense, 107.0. One of the best run defenses in college football. So, with all that being said, does anybody have any questions on the Utah season?
I don't really have any questions. Again, I've said it ad nauseum all season long that Florida loss was just, it was so tough because the narrative of Utah changed so quick from a team that, oh, they're a playoff team. Everybody, major networks, everybody was saying, oh, Utah is going to be a playoff team. If any team from the Pac-12 is going to make the playoffs, it was going to be Utah. Even people were picking Utah over USC because people didn't know how much of a turnaround USC would make. But that Florida loss really hurt. And even if they played Florida in week 2, I think they win that game. I just, it's so tough. It was in week 1. And then you play Southern Utah in week 2, which to me, it's like the whole point of that just doesn't even make sense. You should play that game first, then have to play at Florida. That would make sense because then they'd at least have a game to, get on the field against an inferior opponent and then maybe have a better chance to win against Florida. I mean, I'm not saying if it was in week 2, they would have beaten Florida, but the fact is in week 1, Florida played well. Anthony Richardson played one of the best games of the season for him in week 1, and Utah just fell short. But that game really hurt them because when they lost to UCLA, everyone was already counting them out. I remember people in the comment section, in a lot of videos saying, oh, Utah's not good. They have 2 losses. This USC game's been demoted or whatever. It's not as good of a game. But then when they beat USC the first time, it brought them back. And they, beside the one slip up to Oregon, had a fantastic rest of the season. And then they were able to beat USC again. And now everybody's back on the Utah train. But that Florida loss really changed the narrative of Utah quickly. They were able to get it back. But Utah was always a good team. It was just unfortunate that they had to play at Florida in week 1 and they fell short. But they were still good and they had a great season anyway.
Yep, a remarkable year. And the fact that even after that Oregon loss, that was another one where the Utah fans were kind of like, after that loss, they felt deflated because they needed all these wonky things to happen, which it did in their favor. One of those scenarios where everything fell for them and they got the chance because, a lot of USC fans, as you pointed out, like USC thought it was a fluke. Like if we play you again on a neutral site, guess what? Utah, you don't stand a chance because we have the Heisman, we have the best offense. You wouldn't do it. And Utah basically took their lunch money and stole it and said, "This is our Pac-12."
I agree with that. For sure.
What do you think,
Utah, they win.
What do you think, Jackson, of Utah season?
It's unfortunate that they lost to Florida, but it is what it is, things happen, but at least they were able to win the Pac-12 for a second straight year. I mean, I didn't think they could do it, where after they lost to Florida and UCLA, then lost that close one to Oregon, I was like, that's what I get for doubting them. So you'd think I'd learn that lesson from 2021, but yeah.
And this is interesting, too. This is the second straight year Utah has done this, beaten USC twice, and last year they beat Oregon twice, all in the same scenario. So that tells you right there that that's not a fluke. Utah is that team. They are just the kryptonite of Oregon and USC.
Yes, Edward.
I mean, you look at Utah's defense, their defense is 100 yards better than USC. And I mean, their run defense is fantastic. I mean, that's the only reason why Utah, has been a solid team the last few years is because their defense is always keeping them in games for the most part. I mean, yes, USC put up 43 on them and UCLA put up 42 on them, but both those offenses when they're on are fantastic. So Utah's defense has been a big help for them all season, especially when they had some injuries to some of their key offensive players as well.
Yeah. Utah's defense is one of the big reasons why they won a lot of their games too. And Cam Rising, now, to me personally, I think Cam Rising is one of the most disrespected guys because of the narrative that is put on him about Florida. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think he's properly respected, or do you think he's always going to have that chip on his shoulder?
he was undervalued last year, and then that Ohio State game, the way he played, a lot of people elevated him in their minds. But then the pick against Florida again demoted Cam Rising's stock in the national media. Basically, you can really just say that Cam Rising's stock went with what Utah was doing. So when Utah was riding high, people respect Cam Rising more. And when Utah lost a couple games that maybe they shouldn't, or unfortunately they lost, then people started to think negatively of Cam Rising a little bit. So it's more of people thought of him as Utah went.
So let me say this, because I'm going to give my full breakdown for Utah as a whole when I give my pick. The only thing I'll say with this, as far as Cam Rising, and let me explain fully before anybody says anything. Cam Rising is like LeBron James after he won the 2020 NBA Finals. Does anybody remember what he said? He said at the end of his little spiel, he said, "And I want my bleeping respect." Cam Rising deserves respect no matter what. He deserves respect from all of us. He's got my bleeping respect, but he deserves respect from the national media.
But unfortunately, the national media is focusing on Will Levis and Anthony Richardson.
Mm-hmm.
I will say,
the NFL draft dominates what people think about quarterbacks, and it shouldn't. Even if you're not considered a high draft pick, doesn't mean you're not a great quarterback.
Nope.
I will say, before we move on to the Penn State slide, I will say I've been a Cam Rising backer from the beginning. I think this kid's got special talent. You know, he's not obviously going to be a first-round pick because he's not the tallest. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but that kid will play. He can play, and he puts it all out there for you. Unlike some quarterbacks, the guy on the bottom of my screen knows a lot about those quarterbacks. But that's not here nor now. Anyway, there's another team we have to get to. On to the Penn State Nittany Lions, who represent. Yes, thank you, good man. The Penn State Nittany Lions, 10-2 and 7-2 in the Big Ten. And, well, this here, Penn State, the team with all the hype coming in, is this the year James Franklin can finally put it together? You know, can he beat Ohio State, beat Michigan, and can Penn State go on their Cinderella ride again? Well, let's find out. So they start at Purdue in a wild 35-31 game. That was another one of those games that had some controversy at the end. You know, maybe the referees had a hand in it in some people's eyes, especially from Purdue fans. But that's neither here nor there. Penn State won, and then they come home and they just smack the Ohio Bobcats 46-10. Then they go at Auburn and win 41-12, and everyone at that time was saying, "Oh, that's a really big win. Penn State's ready. They're going to challenge for the Big Ten. They beat an SEC team." Well, we seen what Auburn was, fellas. Not too hot. Anyway, on to Central Michigan with a 33-14 win at home, and then a 17-7 win at home against Northwestern. Kind of an Ohio State kind of game where they only won by 10 when they probably should have won by more, because Northwestern is doo-doo. They are awful. They are terrible. Let's go on. Week 6, they go on their bye, and then they come off the bye at Michigan. They take a 41-17 loss. Michigan, you know, in the second half, turned it on. They were able to run the ball very well in that first half, and J.J. McCarthy did his thing, and there was their first loss. And then next week at home, whiteout against Minnesota, 45-17 bounce back. And then comes the game in week 9 where, okay, you lost to Michigan, but okay, here comes big bad Ohio State. Can we get this one, please, James? Can we get this one for the love of goodness? At home, Ohio State, and you lose 44-31 because Sean Clifford doesn't know how to not turn over the ball, because that's just him. And then week 10 at Indiana, 45-14 win. Sorry about that, Jeffrey. Tough luck. Next year. Love you, buddy. Anyway, on to week 11 versus Maryland. A skunking 30-0. And then week 12 at Rutgers 55-10. And then versus Michigan State 35-16. Ending the season on a high note, 2022 Penn State stats. Total offense 432.4 yards. Total defense 317.8 total defense. Pass offense 250.3 yards. Pass offense 250.3. Pass defense 212.8. Run offense 182.1. Run defense 105.1. So their run defense is like Utah's, one of the best in football. Any questions on the Penn State season or thoughts?
No, but
I think
they
that
have one.
I think Penn State had a great season, considering what they've been playing lately. They had the bad season in 2020. So, I mean, for Penn State, they've been struggling a little bit. So it's a great season. But for what Penn State fans want, it's not a great season. Obviously, Penn State wants to be a playoff team. They want to contend in the Big Ten East. And they flat out failed against their two biggest opponents every single year. They didn't beat Michigan. They didn't beat Ohio State. They were not competitive against Michigan. They tried to be competitive against Ohio State, but they fell short. So, I mean, on paper, this is a great season for Penn State. But again, for the media and for what Penn State fans want, this was not the outcome Penn State fans are wanting to get. But as I've said before, Penn State's been really struggling for a while, for a few seasons. So, again, this was a good bounce-back season for Penn State to make that jump. And who knows, maybe with a new quarterback next year, they can finally make that leap and finally be that team. We don't know. But Penn State, it was a great season to bounce back, have a better year, but not a great season for what the fans want.
Yeah.
Well, and
Go ahead, Buck.
one thought I'd like to
Jackson.
mention is Penn State. Well, James Franklin, with those two losses to Michigan, Ohio State, James Franklin is now 2-15 against top 10 teams.
Just awful.
Now, is he going to be 2-16 or is he going to be 3-15 after the Rose Bowl? That you are going to see in a little bit.
I will say, I'm not trying to tick my good buddy Buckeye Mike off at the bottom here, but I believe if Sean Clifford doesn't turn that ball over, we're looking at a completely different outcome than 44-31. I think Pitt State might win this game. Might. We don't know. Maybe Ohio State eventually gets their offense in gear. But
I can tell you for a fact that Penn State doesn't win that game because we gave up a garbage touchdown in the last few minutes to make it as close as it was. It wasn't supposed to be that close, but the defense was just like, we're going to win anyway. We're USC for a minute. Just walk right into the end zone. Thank you for coming.
always back to USC. But yeah, what do you think of that, Buckeye Mike? Since you got to watch it firsthand, with those turnovers that Clifford had, do you think they had any big impact? Or do you think it was just that was one of those days where Ohio State was just going to get there no matter what, with or without those turnovers?
Oh, Ohio State was going to win hands down no matter what because, to Jackson's point, 2-15 against top 10 schools.
Yeah.
Time's really running out, James. You're lucky that Penn State was scared because you should be gone already. That's not good. Clock's ticking, buddy.
I agree with you, Buckeye Mike, and I agree with Austin on both arguments. I agree that Ohio State 99.9% would have won the game. But I do agree that if he doesn't make the mistakes, then that game is potentially a one-score game. It would have been a lot closer. Penn State was winning the game, and then they just completely fell apart. So if the mistakes aren't made, that game could have been a lot closer, but I still think Ohio State would have won, but it would have been a lot closer.
Yeah.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's what this game is all about. I don't care about the stupid, style points. They didn't win well big enough, so we got to move them down the rankings. No.
Well, unfortunately, the narrative though on a team, if you perform close, then you're a better team. Look at Alabama. That's the excuse that they made to making the playoff was that, oh, they barely lost the games that they lost to. They lost by 4 points combined in the 2 games. So
Mhm.
yeah, style points kind of do matter. You don't want to get blown out. You don't, because then the narrative is different. When Penn State got blown out against Michigan, that just looked bad. When they were slightly competitive against Ohio State, it didn't look as bad. It's just the way it is. Whether
Right.
that's fair or not, because at the end of the day, you're right, Buck. The result's the same, but the way you lose matters to an extent, especially just with the narrative and what people think of you.
Well,
Now, I would like to ask, real quick, Jackson, before you go, the Penn State schedule, looking at it, what can we honestly say is their best win?
Auburn.
Purdue.
Because looking at that schedule, it does not look in their favor. Like, if you're
I would
comparing
agree that the
resumes,
Purdue
let's-
win was the best win. Because even though I know
Yeah,
that I just said
Penn
the style
State-
points of the Auburn win, but for one thing, Auburn was in shambles at the beginning of the season. Auburn improved as the season went along. So if Penn State played Auburn later in the year, that score's probably not the same. I understand the style points matter and they blew them out, but Auburn was playing that bad. They almost lost to San Jose State early on in the season. It was that bad for Auburn. They improved as the season went along. So I would say the Purdue win, just because of the fact Purdue at least made the Big Ten championship game. Auburn for the style points, but again, if that game was played later on in the year, the score wouldn't have been as big of a blowout either.
True.
Great.
And, the attitude of that Auburn team at the time, right? The attitude of
Yeah.
they acted as if they wanted to just get through the day. They were all just miserable. I mean, first 2 games as well. Purdue was bringing their A game on Thursday night. Auburn did not bring their A game in week 3. They brought their A game at the tail end of the season with Cadillac Williams, but nobody was bringing their A game with Brian Harsin.
To Austin's point about how if Penn State didn't make the mistakes, they maybe could have beaten Ohio State. Well, the other flip side of that would be if Payne Durham catches the ball against Penn State, which I still thought he caught it, but they didn't give it to him. Purdue wins that game, and that is a fair
Yeah.
So that was a completely difference maker in that game. They probably would have won, but Penn State they pulled it out. But yeah, I mean that's probably their best win because of all the circumstances. But yeah, you guys are right, and everybody in the chat, the schedule's weak. They didn't really beat anybody that was good. They don't have a top 25 win, so it wasn't good. But unfortunately, the way it works is Penn State's a brand, and since Penn State ran through the schedule and only lost to the 2 best teams, they're still a great team to a lot of people, even if they're not at the elite level of Michigan, Ohio State.
So to Chris's question, yes, number 44 is JT, and as it's technically pronounced, it's JT Tuimoloau.
What a name.
And do not, it's been announced on the radio here in the Columbus area, do not call him JTT because he does not like it.
Mm-hmm. Now, my thing that I will say to this is, what do you all think about Penn State getting this Rose Bowl spot? Because we're looking at the schedule and we're like, what quality wins do you even have to be here other than the fact that Ohio State, Michigan made the playoffs?
Well,
what do y'all
that's the
think
only
about that?
argument. I mean, I agree with you because your point is do they deserve it? No, because they haven't really done anything basically based off the schedule that they didn't really beat anybody that was super great, and their 2 losses are the best team. So on paper, you could say, well, they don't deserve it, but they had to be there because since Michigan and Ohio State made the play, if Ohio State didn't make the playoff, they're in this game. So since they both made the playoff, they had to be here. There was no other team that was even close to saying, hey, we deserve this spot. It had to be Penn State.
Here's the thing. Penn State is the 3rd best team in the conference as a whole.
That's what I'm saying. Since both made the playoff, it had to be Penn State. I'm saying, did they deserve it?
Yeah.
Maybe not, based off the fact that Ohio State would have gotten this spot normally.
So here's the thing. It was going to be either Penn State or Purdue in the Rose Bowl. Who's more deserving of the Rose Bowl? Penn State. Why would it be one of those two and not Ohio State? Because Ohio State, for whatever stupid reason, again, stupid fan base, too many freaking crazies, stupid fan base. I'd love to watch them play in the Rose Bowl again, back to back. I don't care. It's a bowl game. Enjoy the football. Quit taking it so serious. If they didn't make the playoff, they didn't want to play in the Rose Bowl. So they were opting out of the Rose Bowl, and we're going to play Clemson in the Orange Bowl and slaughter and beat the crap out of an actually good team. But, again, Penn State is the one that deserves to be here.
Now, I will ask, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, do you think if you make the Big Ten championship, I know we're going divisionless, almost everybody is, but like Purdue, since they made the Big Ten championship, do you think that's worthy of being put there in that spot, or should it just be based on your resume?
So technically, usually, yes. If you're the runner-up because the champion makes the playoff, then yes. The loser of the Big Ten championship should be in the Rose Bowl. But, because I know Jeffrey has a counterpoint, so let me jump ahead of it. Because Purdue's record is so much worse than Penn State, to what I was saying, is more deserving of being in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, in which I understand that. No, the West sucked and it deserved squat. Yeah, the West was awful. Like, because Iowa still could have won it. Illinois, like anybody could have came out of that. But that's neither here nor there. But Jackson, give us your prediction who you think's going to win.
Well, before I go on about my pick, Will's pick was Utah 28-24. So that's going to be a Utah victory, but it's going to be closer, according to Will. But here's what I have. I have Utah winning against Penn State, but it's going to be a 38-28 victory. Austin, who do you have on this one?
Yeah, if Jeffrey ever gets back, we'll get his pick. But yes, this game here, I have some rooting interest. Okay. We'll get to mine in a second. Go ahead, Jeffro. We're picking the game.
Again, to Buckeye Mike's point, just to clarify again, when I said Penn State didn't deserve it, because I'm basing off that Ohio State should have been in this game. If the other teams didn't flat out lose like Tennessee, then Ohio State wouldn't have made the playoff and they would have been in the Rose Bowl. So Penn State didn't deserve it from that standpoint, but based on what happened, they had to be there because no one else deserved it. So I agree with you, because Purdue, you can't put them there. But to pick this game, again, Penn State, as Jackson's pointed out a million times, they choke in big games. They can't beat top 10 teams. James Franklin just can't get it done. Clock's ticking, says Buckeye Mike. I don't know. He's got a big contract. I mean, they need to wait for the end. They need to wait for the Drew Ayler, era to begin, see what he could do. I mean, they got a lot of talent. So if you can't win with him, then maybe, but still, I mean, Penn State's expectations are even lower than Michigan and Ohio State. So I don't know if going 10-2 every year is going to make him get fired, but who knows? But again, Penn State, your solid team. Sean Clifford, solid quarterback, but Cam Rising is more reliable than Sean Clifford. Utah, they want to be here. They're not one of those teams that's going to have a million opt-outs. They have both their tight ends not playing, but everybody else is. Penn State, you got some players that are not playing as well. I think both teams are going to play well. I think it's going to be a great game. But I'm going to go with Utah to beat Penn State 35-28.
35-28.
Yes.
Wow. Close to mine.
And this is another thing.
Like one on the live chat said, great minds think alike. You were saying, Austin?
Yes. So the two interviews my co-host here did with the Salt Lake Tribune and the Locked On Utes, go check them out. Great interviews. Good job, guys. They said the Rose Bowl is going to be the game that is going to be another thing for Cam Rising. If he doesn't win it, the narrative is going to be, oh, Cam Rising doesn't show up again. What a surprise. But if he does, then the narrative will be, oh, Cam Rising can play in the big game now. And that's why this game's so important, I think, for Utah more than it is Penn State. Now, if you're looking at it from Penn State, James Franklin, yes, you need a big win here. You need to win this game because, like Buckeye Mike said, that buyout might be coming sooner than you think. But I think in this game, like I said, I have rooting interest on the Utah side. And in this game, I think Penn State will keep it close. You know, Utah's never really a team that runs away with it quicker than a lot of people are thinking. I think at halftime it may be like 17-10 Utah. But at the end, I think Utah will be a little much. And Sean Clifford, you know, he's good for 1 or 2 turnovers. I'm going Utah 33, Penn State 19. The Utes are going to win.
Buckeye Mike, your pick.
Yeah, so all right. See if I can do this in 15 minutes. Okay. First of all, can we go back to the Utah slide, please?
There you go.
Okay. So
It's beautiful.
it is beautiful. Good job, buddy. First of all, that Florida loss, as bad as it is, we all accept it. And the thing is, Utah could actually, because it was the first game of the year, could actually afford to have lost that game. So that game itself is almost like a wipeout. Like, okay, good job if you had won the game. It does matter, but because you lost, it doesn't matter. Doesn't count. Where I think they screwed themselves is that game 3 lines above that awesome picture of Cam Rising, Oregon. Because, okay, losing to, where is it? Losing to UCLA is okay. It looked worse and worse as the season went on, but it's okay. That Oregon loss is the key right there. If they do not lose that game, they're right around that 5-6 spot where Ohio State Bama is. Utah is the king and the owner of the Pac-12. I don't care what USC fans or any Pac-12 fan for that matter, just not to just single out USC here. I don't care what any Pac-12 fan has to say. Utah is the king of the Pac-12. You've won it twice in a row. Good job. Now,
Does that mean Michigan's king of the Big Ten so they beat Ohio State 2 years in a row?
No, that's different.
See, I'm just kidding, man. I'm just kidding.
All right, now let's go back down 1 to Penn State. Okay, so to everybody's point, yes, Purdue technically is the best win of the season for Penn State. Why? Because good job, Penn State. You did your job. You lost to Michigan and Ohio State like you're supposed to. You're always supposed to lose to those 2 teams. You can beat everybody else. Got to lose to them too. So, big win against Purdue. Supposed to beat Ohio. Good job. The shocking one was Auburn. It wasn't just that it was Auburn. It was by how much. Because if you look at last year and this year's, last year was 28-20 in Happy Valley.
Edward says, how is that different?
How's what different?
Talking about Michigan, Ohio State, and talking about the other one, man. With,
it's different. So I'm going to answer this real quick and then jump back into this. It's different because Ohio State has dominated and owned the Big Ten, except for the last 2 years, whereas the Pac-12 up until last year has been somebody different every time. So that's how it's different. So if we look at last year against Auburn, it was 28-20. It was a good close game with Bo Nix at Auburn. Bo Nix leaves, and it's a blowout at Auburn. Auburn usually doesn't lose at home. Usually. So that started that downward tidal wave for Auburn. Enough on Auburn. So then you start going into, okay, Central Michigan. Okay, it's a MAC school. You're supposed to beat the MAC schools. You're supposed to just curb stomp them on the curb. What's up, Talkers Pitt?
What's
Penn
up,
State's-
man?
Penn State
What's
sucks.
up?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
No
So-
love from Pittsburgh. Huh?
Oh yeah, love Pitt. Good team.
Oh,
Central Michigan, good job. Easy win.
I love how Pitt is a
Um,
good team, but Penn State sucks. Even though in most years Penn State's better than Pitt. That's funny how that works out. I mean, just
Now
It's because
people are going
Pittsburgh won the ACC last year, but that's beside the point. Go ahead.
to wrangle me for this next one because Penn State only beat Northwestern 17-7, which is 4 points less than Ohio State beat Northwestern. Conditions were different because it was at Happy Valley. So there is that. And Northwestern's defense is just pretty good for what it is worth. And then
Chris
the
said
slaughter.
Auburn did beat San Jose State 24-16 the week before. Penn State's maybe they retired by playing such a powerhouse the week before. Oh man.
Okay, Chris. Wow, really? Pitt is
We're gonna
doo-doo.
start this
Keith
again.
Slovis couldn't keep Pitt at a high level.
Yep. Okay, and then the slaughter against Michigan. Like I said, you're supposed to lose that one. Minnesota. Minnesota for me was the toss-up because who doesn't love PJ Fleck? Minnesota really should have won that one. Because that really was a trap game stuck between Michigan and Ohio State. We've
Yeah, that
talked
was a
about
really good win too. The only reason why I didn't say it was their best win because it was at home.
yeah.
I will say that was a whiteout game too. It's hard to go into Happy Valley on a whiteout and win. It's very hard. So Minnesota, we don't play for that.
It was only the whiteout because the Ohio State game was not at night. I believe it was like noon or 3:30. Indiana, yeah, sorry, Jeffrey. I mean, you lost Michael Penix Jr. to Indiana's stupidity, and it really cost him. I mean, he's the freaking savior of Indiana. You beat Penn State by 1 point, and you almost beat Ohio State by coming back from being down so much in the same year.
I
Maryland,
will say if Dexter Williams was quarterback and didn't get hurt, the game would have been closer against Penn State because I think that he would have been able to run around a little bit. They wouldn't have won though.
Okay. Maryland. Tualia. I guess you're all right. Let's see, Rutgers. Obviously, they should have beat them worse, and then Michigan State. Like, really, you couldn't beat them by more. So, I mean, overall, I know my focus is here, and then I'm looking over at the chat at the same time, so I'm kind of split here. I wasn't as thorough as I wanted to be, but basically, when it comes down to it, Utah has proven to beat the teams that you're not necessarily supposed to beat on a regular basis. You weren't supposed to beat Oregon. You beat Oregon twice last year. And you weren't supposed to beat USC. You beat them twice this year. Both times confirming neither game was a fluke. Nobody was off or anything like that. So, that being said, my rooting interest, because I'm a Big Ten guy, is Penn State. But my pick goes to Utah. I'm taking Utah to win this game. And here's the thing. Someone said in the chat, I forget where it was. I'm not going back to dig it up. Someone in the chat said that Penn State would win 38-20. Excuse me? How in the world will Penn State win by almost 3 touchdowns when they took Ohio State to the brink last year? And realistically, coming from a Buckeye, should have probably won that game. So please explain to me how Penn State wins by 3 touchdowns, but yet Ohio State is built and it is just straight up better than Penn State. So give me Utah to win the game. Utah really wants to win this game. I'm going to go.
There's your comment.
Yes.
Just too much
Yep.
D on Penn State. Ooh.
Yeah, but you look at the stats, though. If you look at the stats, Penn State has 317.8 total yards of defense, and Utah's 325. They're essentially about the same. And Utah's offense is 40 yards better than Penn State's. So if you look at it like that, then technically Utah's a better team. Now, that doesn't always mean that the better statistical team is going to win the game either. That's not how it works, because I've been burned a lot on that. But again, to Jackson's point, Penn State has a tough time winning in big games. Maybe they can do it. They have the talent to win the game. But if Sean Clifford does throw 2 interceptions like he normally does in big games, Utah will win.
And to Troy's point, yes, the big tight end for Utah, Kincaid, is not playing. I know it's not last year. That wasn't my point, per se. God. Okay. So Utah has basically proven they don't necessarily need Kincaid, because Kincaid didn't really play too much in the Pac-12 championship. So on that point. So Utah is going to win this game, coming out for revenge. They're going to win. Give me Utah 52, Penn State 33.
I'd be shocked if there's that much offense in this game with 2 great defenses, but we'll see. Maybe you never know.
True.
Here's the thing, too. Interesting. Penn State, it has a better run defense by 2 yards. 105 to 107 by 2 yards. So this game's also going to come down to who can run the ball better, too, because then that's going to set up a lot of the passing attack.
It's going to be big. Penn State stops the run. If they take that away, they don't have their best weapon. I don't see them scoring much from Troy V.
Which is true. Although USC did take away the run too, though, and it seemed to backfire on them. So,
well, they only took it away for a short period if you're talking about the Pac-12 title, because, I mean,
At the end of the game, Utah was running all over them.
Yeah.
No,
They shut it
not
down.
the first meeting. The second meeting, there was no second half. Utah had their way. But the first meeting, USC keyed in on the run and was holding it. It was the fact that they had Dalton Kincaid running wide open every time and some other receivers running so wide open that eventually it opened up at the end. And that's when Cam Rising was able to do his best stuff. But go ahead, Buckeye Mike.
I was just saying, I mean, it just depends on which meeting you're talking about. And, I mean, yeah, we can throw up all these awesome slides. Great job, everyone. Even though Will gave the lesser effort out of everyone. Great job.
Oh, yeah. I mean, those stats, man, they were hard to find, man. They were hard to find.
But we got
You know how hard it is to find Penn State's best moment? Be like, because they have none. They didn't win no title game or nothing, Mike.
Well, that's
okay,
what I'm
go
saying.
ahead.
You're good. You're good. That's what I'm saying. You're like, okay, you'd almost have to like put that picture against Auburn, that last touchdown for Penn State, that breakaway touchdown, that running breakaway touchdown. That would have to be your picture. Then you'd have to have one section where it's the schedule, and then the next section would be your stats. Because it's like, what other moment or it would be probably something from the Purdue game. That's it.
When Payne Durham, they didn't give him the catch.
I will say I was just messing with you, Buckeye Mike, because Penn State doesn't have a good schedule, so it's kind of hard to find their best moment in there somewhere. That it was jokingly.
You could have showed the scoreboard when they were beating Ohio State for brief.
It's called
Really?
false advertisement, though. We don't want to do that here.
I know. I'm kidding. It's kind of like Lee Corso when he was the Indiana coach, man, and they were beating Ohio State 7-0. He took a picture of it in the first quarter. Then they lost 54-7 or whatever.
Yeah, not real smart.
The fact that Will has Cade in a number 6 jersey when he wears number 2 was hilarious for me.
So we gonna wrap up the show, guys, and we have more thoughts on this game.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts that we have, gentlemen?
Yeah.
I just
let's see. Penn State's okay. Utah's amazingly great. USC sucks. Tulane's awesome. They're gonna stomp a mud hole in USC. Clemson is definitely pretty good. I think they're almost back to national championship levels. Tennessee is a one-timer. It was great to have you in the New Year's Six, but we'll never see you again, most likely. I'm trying to remember. Oh, Bama is still good, and they're Bama. Kansas State is showing promise, and welcome to the party, Wildcats. We hope to see you on a consistent basis, especially with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 because they're wimps.
So I got a quick question for everybody.
You can say they're wimps, man, but they're going into the bloodbath in the SEC, man. So I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, they're going into the SEC, and you know where they're going to be? They're going to be down here at the bottom with.
For everyone in our chat and here on the panel, out of all the New Year's Six games that we just broke down in preview, what do we think it might be the best one of the group? Me personally, USC Tulane's probably going to be the best one. A lot of scoring and
honestly, Austin, I'm torn between the Cotton Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. But that's just me now.
Well, the Sugar Bowl makes sense for you, buddy.
Yeah.
So for me,
could be this
it's
one.
a three-way tie, and it does not include Will's game. It's all of your guys' games, and it's a three-way tie.
I agree with that. I mean, this game has to be included in a potential best game. But yeah, I agree. A three-way tie between those three games. Yeah, Clemson, Tennessee's not gonna be good unless somehow Joe Milton, man, can play like he did against Vanderbilt. But I don't think it's gonna happen. We'll see. Anything's possible though. But yeah, I think all three of these games are gonna be really good.
The problem, to your point, the problem is that Tennessee, in order for it to be a great game, has to rely on their defense. And their defense, like USC's defense, is still better than USC, but it's not there. And that's a problem.
I'll just wrap up with
say
my parts by saying that I can't wait for these bowl games. I can't wait for all four of them. I hope they're all fantastic, even if some of them are blowouts or, they're not good games, but I hope they're all great games. I can't wait to see the results, and thanks for everybody for being here. It was a great show, and I can't wait for tomorrow's show.
Yes, one last thought. I'm really looking forward to the USC Tulane game. I think that'll probably be the best game, especially if Caleb plays. But honestly, I'm going to be intrigued for the Utah-Penn State game because I hope Utah does it. Because I hope Cam Rising gets that monkey off the back, that he can finally get it done, that the media will shut up about him not being a good quarterback.
They won't.
They'll be quiet about it.
Even if he does win, they won't shut up because they always look for the negative in guys like Cam Rising. And it's stupid. He's great. Leave him alone. If you're not going to praise him, leave him alone.
But anywho, thank you all for being here. Please like and subscribe. And as always, we will be back tomorrow night for our regular scheduled Thursday programming. And now we get into the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, the college football playoffs. Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU.
Wait, I didn't know we were going to have Christmas leftovers during the show.
But if
We're
you have
back
any
to our
root interest,
regularly
come on
scheduled
back.
programming.
Break it down.
Be back for regularly scheduled programming. Right here.
Exactly. But that'll be all tomorrow. So come back and join us. But
Bye.
until then, good night.
night,
Love you
everybody.
guys.